I rise today to speak to Bill C-45, the Trudeau government's plan to legalize marijuana. If the aim of this bill, as the government repeatedly states, is to keep marijuana out of the hands of children and to protect the health and safety of Canadians, this legislation will fail spectacularly on both fronts. By rushing to pass this legislation by the summer, the Trudeau government is neglecting to provide adequate infrastructure and planning prior to legalization. At best, this will result in a bungled and disastrous implementation, but at its worst, and I believe most likely, this will risk the health and safety of Canadians, and particularly our youth. As we consider the Trudeau government's marijuana legislation, the foremost question senators should ask themselves is why? Why are we doing this? Why legalization? Why now? The answer to that is fairly straightforward. The Trudeau government is doing this now to try to curry favor with voters, especially young voters, in the next election. And they have chosen legalization rather than decriminalization because under a legalization regime, the government will profit monetarily from the tax revenue the industry will generate. It took the Trudeau government 7 months to strike a task force whose aim was not to consider the best approach to drug regulation, but rather to only determine how to implement the rather extreme campaign promise of marijuana legalization. Make no mistake, honourable senators, legalizing marijuana will make Canada a total outlier internationally. The only other country that has implemented a full legalization regime is Uruguay. Is this really how we want to demonstrate leadership on the world stage? It's curious that among the litany of broken Liberal election promises, the Trudeau government has chosen the legalization of marijuana as the sole election promise it is committed to keeping. Driven by a self-imposed artificial political deadline of implementation by this summer, the Trudeau government has hastily assembled Bill C-45 and its companion impaired driving legislation, Bill C-46. Both bills are shoddily constructed and raise a myriad of unanswered questions that will lead to unintended and devastating consequences. Why is this government hurtling headlong into uncharted territory? For the Trudeau government, what is politically expedient will always trump common sense. Canada is just not ready to implement the Liberal marijuana legalization scheme. Our provinces, our municipalities, our law enforcement, our healthcare system, our legal system, all have told this government that Canada is just not ready. They need more time, more training, more education, more research, more infrastructure, and more funding to ramp up to handle a societal change of this magnitude. Yet the Trudeau government is willfully blind to all of this. We should have learned from jurisdictions like Colorado and Washington who have already implemented marijuana legalization. They are very clear. Making such a significant policy change requires defining a clear purpose, taking the time to properly implement a well-thought-out regulatory framework, and building public health capacity and executing effective, widespread education and awareness campaigns prior to legalization. Colorado had about 1 year to implement its regulatory structure, and they suggested that even that timeline was too aggressive. We don't have even nearly that long. This government wants this legislation to pass by the summer, giving retail businesses only 8 to 12 weeks after that to get ready to sell marijuana to Canadians. How can we possibly expect that this will all unroll smoothly? And when it doesn't, the consequences will be disastrous. We can't put that genie back in the bottle, honourable senators. And what is the government's justification for unleashing such chaos? They claim legalizing marijuana will decrease the drug's use by young people. The fact is, Canadian teens' use of marijuana has declined significantly in the last number of years, while marijuana has remained illegal in Canada. If this is already a trend, is the legalization of marijuana necessary? Public health education has played a key role in reducing cigarette smoking among teens. Is the answer, therefore, increased education about marijuana rather than legalization? The Trudeau government claims one of the most important purposes of Bill C-45 is to get drugs out of the hands of kids. Yet this legislation will leave a federal legal vacuum that will allow kids from 12 to 17 years old to possess and distribute up to 5 grams of marijuana. Clearly, those kids won't be accessing that marijuana legally. It may even provide an opportunity for criminals to use kids to distribute black market marijuana for them without penalty. Further, at the same time the Trudeau government claims legalization will keep drugs out of the hands of Canadian kids, it is going to allow their parents to grow as many as 4 marijuana plants right in those kids' homes. I'm not sure how much more accessible marijuana could get for kids. While the government may be able to control the quality and toxicity of marijuana sold via retail stores in a legalized system, homegrown marijuana and edibles created from them will remain unregulated. Because edibles can be of a higher potency than a smoked product and often have a delayed effect, there is an increased risk of overdose, especially for children, whether by intentional or accidental ingestion. With no mandatory testing of environmental safety, home grow operations present additional dangers to children within their homes. This can include the presence of mold and a 24 times greater incidence of fires in residences growing marijuana. Why, as legislators, would we knowingly put Canadians, especially Canadian kids, at that risk? The Trudeau government's claim that this legislation is about protecting the health and safety of Canadians, and particularly children, is simply wrong. In addition to the significant risks I have already outlined, I am particularly concerned about the neurological and mental health implications of marijuana use, especially for children. Because of the effects of marijuana on the developing adolescent brain, both the Canadian Psychiatric Association and the Canadian Medical Association recommended placing the age of access to marijuana at 21, with restrictions on the quantity and THC potency for those under the age of 25. Medical professionals have testified that increased marijuana use before the age of 25 increases one's risk of developing mental illnesses by up to 30%. Studies suggest that there is a strong association between daily marijuana use and depression in young people. The Canadian Pediatric Society has noted that the risk of developing schizophrenia is doubled in heavy cannabis users. The Canadian Medical Association reports that the 9% lifetime risk of dependence on marijuana almost doubles to 17% when the marijuana use starts in adolescence. When I asked the health minister why she ignored the advice of medical experts to set a higher access age in order to protect the mental health of young people, she gave me a 2-minute answer without even once saying the words mental health. It is a joke that this government claims that they are prioritizing mental health, and yet they are legalizing this drug that has proven to have such a major impact on mental health, particularly for youth. The health minister acknowledged that there are health risks associated with marijuana. But as I asked her here, if the government knows those risks, then why are they dead set on legalizing it? Of course, the minister could not provide an adequate answer. The real answer, the one the Trudeau government will not admit, is that they are pushing this issue for their political advantage and legalizing it for the money grab. That this government knows the risks of marijuana and is willing to jeopardize the health and safety of Canadians for its own political gain is reprehensible. Of course, the Justice Minister points to C-46, Bill C-45's companion impaired driving legislation, as proof of the government's commitment to managing some of the significant risks of legalization. This is pure farce. For a whole host of reasons, roadside drug testing equipment cannot adequately determine the level of an individual's impairment. Even the Justice Minister has had to admit that the science for the roadside detection of drug-impaired driving is continuing to, as she puts it, quote, evolve. Do you know what that means? It means that the science is just not ready. And because the science isn't ready, that means our police forces can't be ready. How can they be when they don't even know what the regulations are, and the federal government has not yet chosen which roadside device they're planning to use? We have 600 drug recognition experts in this country. To implement the legalization of marijuana, we will require an estimated 3,000, and those DREs currently need to be trained in the US. Yet Prime Minister Trudeau tells Canadians that marijuana will be legalized by the summer, within 5 months. It's preposterous. In testimony before the House Committee, the Deputy Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police said, quote, policing will not be ready to go August 1st. It's impossible, quote. Just last week, the Saskatoon Police Chief said he would welcome a 1-year extension to allow more time for training. But this Trudeau government forges on ahead without listening, even when our country's law enforcement and safety experts indicate that Prime Minister Trudeau's drug legalization plan is too much, too soon. I won't focus on Bill C-46 while we're here today to discuss C-45, but I do want to underscore the significant problems witnesses are telling our Senate Legal Committee are inherent in the Trudeau government's drug-impaired driving legislation. In my 5 years as a senator serving on that committee, I have never heard a bill so roundly condemned as unconstitutional by so many legal experts. Canadian Council of Defence, Criminal Defence Lawyers witness Adam Stephen Boney said Bill C-46 set all his charter nerves tingling. He said, quote, This legislation contains so many constitutional defects that on the ground level, when it hits in provincial courts across this country, there are going to be constitutional challenges, charter challenges to multiple sections, whether it's on a basis of overbreadth, violation of proposed Section 8 and Section 9, or the minimum mandatory sentencing provisions. We are going to have a very large amount of charter litigation, quote. This affects our discussion today on C-45 because this Trudeau government has flashed C-46 around as its public safety justification for legalizing marijuana, and that legislation has more holes than a block of Swiss cheese. The constitutional issues alone illustrate the extent to which this government's marijuana legalization scheme has been slapped together. The Trudeau government plans to push it through anyways, regardless of the implications to not only Canadians' health and safety, but also their constitutional rights. This government has no business trying to ram through marijuana legalization in Bill C-45 before the safety precautions of C-46 are properly fixed and implemented. Based on Colorado's experience, we can expect drug-impaired driving to increase significantly once marijuana is legalized. The safety provisions of C-46 should already be in place and working well before that eventuality. Jurisdictions that have legalized marijuana all suggest that a cohesive, coherent, and widespread public education campaign is crucial before legalization, especially for kids. Public education campaigns need adequate time to spread widely and require a lot of repetition before the public absorbs an advertisement's message, particularly on a complex topic like marijuana legalization. While Public Safety apparently ran a small social media campaign last November, the National Health Canada education campaign is not due for release until later this month. March is much too late, honourable colleagues. The government is promising implementation of legalization within weeks. To rush all of this for an artificial political deadline and risk the health and safety of Canadians is not only unnecessary, but it is negligent. Minister Ralph Goodale told me that the objective of legalizing marijuana is to, quote, get rid of the criminal black market in marijuana. RCMP Assistant Commissioner of Federal Policing Operations, Joanne Crampton, testified before the House of Commons Justice Committee that it would be, quote, naive to think that this legislation will eliminate it. While the government has set the price for legalized marijuana at $10 a gram, a recent study released by Statistics Canada indicates that the current price of marijuana averages $7 a gram. This will likely mean that adults will purchase the more regulated, controlled potency marijuana, while kids will opt for the cheaper, likely more potent, unregulated variety. Yes.
It's now 3:30. The minister is available. So pardon me?
2 minutes till I finish. Would that be okay to just?
Is it agreed, honourable senators? Okay, Senator
Thank
Batters.
you. Kids will opt for the cheaper, likely more potent, unregulated variety still obtained through the illegal black market. Once again, the government will fail in its aims to keep kids away from criminal influence and illegal marijuana. The Trudeau government often overpromises and underdelivers. Its promises don't reflect reality. The government is trying to sell this legislation to Canadians as decriminalization and harm reduction, but they are in fact implementing legalization, which will drive up marijuana usage and its attendant social problems and risks. The normalization of marijuana and its increased availability will lead to increased consumption, especially among Canada's youth. We can expect to see increased strain on our already overburdened healthcare and legal systems as they struggle to handle the fallout of marijuana legalization through increased hospital visits and additional courtroom delays caused by a glut of drug-impaired driving charges and constitutional challenges. This bill will not fulfill the aims it heralds. It will not protect the health and safety of Canadians. It will definitely not keep marijuana out of the hands of kids, and it will not eliminate the black market. Legalization of marijuana is unnecessary given an already declining youth usage rate. If this government intends to forge ahead with legalization, as it seems want to do, against warnings to the contrary, it is proceeding too quickly. Canada is just not ready for such massive social change, and the consequences will be disastrous. Our provinces, our communities, our police forces have all indicated that they are not ready to implement this legislation and that they need more time. The science is not ready. Sufficient research has not been done. The funding rollouts are unclear. Law enforcement is not ready. And the major nationwide public education campaign, the very thing that other jurisdictions have warned us is crucial to successful implementation, has still not been released to Canadians. A lack of foresight in planning this legislation and legalization scheme and the Liberal government's rush to implement it jeopardizes the health and safety of Canadians, especially our young people. Honourable Senators, this is too high a price for Canadians to pay simply to satisfy Prime Minister Trudeau's political ambitions. For all of these reasons, I will vote against Bill C-45 at second reading. Thank you.